Varlamore, the Shining Kingdom, is the largest and most ambitious area expansion ever added in Old School RuneScape's history. It has succeeded where other area expansions have faltered in the past. We're going to discuss the brief history of area expansions in Old School RuneScape, but ultimately talk about what makes Varlamore successful by breaking it down part by part and talking about the key themes that make any area expansion successful in any game. The history of area expansions in Old School RuneScape is quite limited overall when we're looking at something as large as Varlamore. The only comparable thing at scale would be Kourend. Other than that, there's definitely been areas added to the game such as Isles of Souls, Fossil Island, but generally speaking, those are much smaller in scale compared to Kourend and Varlamore. There have also been updates to existing areas and expanding those areas out. The desert is very prominent for this. We have TOA, Temporos, and eventually we're going to get Sophonim as well. Mauritania is an area that's gotten a ton of tender love and care over the years, and we've got stuff like Nightmare and TOB as a result. And don't forget Darkmire. On top of these updates, there have been various other updates and reworks to mini-games, activities, bosses have been added, quests have been added, so there have definitely been content added to Old School RuneScape over time, and areas have been shaped over time, but definitely nothing at the scale of Kourend and Varlamore. And this is probably against most MMOs' directions. This is largely because we're a sandbox MMO and not a theme park MMO. Sandbox MMOs tend to keep areas of the game relevant for a longer period of time compared to theme park MMOs. So when a theme park MMO is adding new content, it usually involves new areas. Whereas we will learn to stick new content in existing areas. Being a sandbox MMO is a key reason why we haven't seen a ton of new area expansions in Old School RuneScape, but probably a larger reason has to do with the release of Kourend. When Kourend was released, it was a very large area that was bland and not much to do. There's two main problems with this. The area didn't feel alive and inspired visually. It was pretty flat, pretty square, so it wasn't a pleasant environment to be in. The other reason has to do with the fact that it was a very large area with very little content, which is not great when it comes to walking around and doing activities when you have these large spaces in between and there really isn't anything to do. I think because it left a sour taste in people's mouths on release, there wasn't going to be an appetite from players in the future for more area expansions. Why would you build more areas if you didn't really nail it and players haven't really enjoyed it? We obviously see the team has done a better job at creating bosses, quests, skilling activities, and we've seen more of those get added to the game because they have been more well received. Fast forward a few years and the team starts to think about how they can build out Varlamore, and they have a lot to learn from Kourend and also a lot to learn from other areas that they've added into the game as well. So the two factors again are, one, environment. Extremely important to make sure that the environment feels alive, that you walk through it and you want to discover more. You want to explore the areas. You want to understand why things look like the way they are. Things aren't just, bland and just put there for no reason. It all makes sense. So that was the first important part. The second, probably larger important part, has to do with the content density. It's extremely important that you're making a space that matches the amount of content that's being added to it. If an area is too large with not enough content, the world feels empty with nothing to do. Even if we're looking at the inception of Old School RuneScape, Lumbridge to Varrock, Varrock to Barbarian Village, those areas when it comes to the lore of how large they actually are would take you days, maybe weeks to travel to, but obviously we're not going to create a space that takes that long to actually travel to. We shrink it down so that there's more content between space. A great example of a game that definitely botched this on release has to be No Man's Sky. No Man's Sky is a space exploration game with trillions of star systems that can be explored, and this was heavily touted before its release. Well, this sounds great, but when we actually got to play the game on release and visit these star systems and these planets, there really wasn't much to do, and it was the same, 10 planets, 10 creatures, and 10 plants. So even though we had such a large space, there was very little content. As a result, we got low content density, and the game was failing. Luckily, No Man's Sky has made a ton of updates since, and it's actually a really fun game. If you're into space sims, I definitely recommend checking it out. But that was a very key example of what we can look at when it comes to content density. Now let's talk about Varlamore and the release of Varlamore. So the team had to think about these two key factors when releasing Varlamore to make sure that they weren't making the same mistakes of the past. First thing they did to kind of make sure they were going to nail on these compared to Kourend is they released it in parts, which definitely helped the team when it comes to developing this content over time, giving them more time to flesh it out. If it was all released at once, we would have got maybe half the content that we got now. So what did we get in parts 1, 2, and 3? I'm going to quickly hammer these off, and then we can talk about them in more detail when we're thinking about environment and density. Part 1 had the Colosseum. It had Moon's Apparel, it had the Hunter Guild, it had a new prayer training method that you can get passively. You could do Sunfire Rune crafting as well and use Sunfire Runes. You had a bunch of quests that were really awesome. The Frog quest, which is completely independent, was super fun and in a very small compact area. We had Nagwa training, which is great for training your stats when you can get to Moon's Apparel. We have a lot of thieving activities. We had an AFK one added, as well as one that's a little bit more active where you go into people's houses. We had a mining activity in Camtorum, and we had an armor mechanic where certain monsters would take more or less damage depending on the armor that they had. Part 2 introduced Huey Kodal and its gear, mastering mixology and its rewards, a Moxiato, which was a bit of a surprise boss no one expected, the Ice Slayer dungeon as well, and the Colossal Worm agility that should have been in part 1 but was pushed to part 2. And in part 3, of course, we got the Doom, we got the Gemstone Crab, which I'm doing right now, we got Veil Totems, the fletching minigame, we got a bunch of quests including the Final Dawn, the end of the line currently for Varlamore, and the Custodia Pass Slayer Den. Wow, okay, so that's a lot of content rambled off, but now let's put a little bit more of a lens and talk about environment, content density, and what parts were successful and what parts were less successful. So part 1, if we're thinking about some of the content there, definitely probably the most successful part overall, arguably with part 3, but we have the Colosseum added, and the Colosseum, what I really like about it, obviously we have the endgame activity, but this main capital city, I don't know, the Colosseum just makes it feel way more alive. Citizens talk about it. It's a big area of the map, like it really sticks out. I love that part of the Colosseum, and I do enjoy the content as well. Even within the city, if we're moving a little bit more, we do have the thieving activities, which have been great for thieving, and it makes the city feel a little bit more alive as well, especially breaking into the houses and whatnot. I do wish there were maybe other activity you can do in the city. There's also a few dungeons in the city that you go in and there's nothing in them, like they're empty. So when it comes to some of the density there, I wish they would improve. But overall, I think the city is great. I think the environment of the city looks great. I love the outside environment of the city as well, the farmland. That part's all amazing. Abide, again, probably could use 1 or 2 pieces of content in those small areas outside of the city. Moving to the Hunters Guild, obviously I've said already the Hunter Guild has been really good, and I think in terms of content, definitely up there. Now, content density, I will say that the Savannah area is a very large area that largely is for like hunting a few things, which I don't know. Hunter areas tend to be a little too large for my liking, but I get you kind of split the creatures up a little bit, but it probably could have been a little bit smaller overall. There is the Riveting Tail quest there, so at least that breaks it up a little bit. There are a few altars as well that you technically make Sunfire Runes in. But generally speaking, Hunter, content-wise, pretty good. Area-wise, environment-wise, honestly, pretty amazing as well. The guild and outside of the guild looks really good. But content density-wise, maybe could be a little bit smaller in some ways. Moon's Apparel, this is an area that, okay, content-wise definitely has it, but man, environment is incredible in Moon's Apparel. We were told with Moon's Apparel it'd be a dungeon that you prep in and take on the bosses, and the only other comparable we really have for that is probably Chambers and Gauntlet, probably being the closer comparable. Gauntlet in particular, it's miserable to prep in. Now, Moon's Apparel is a little bit worried for this, but they actually made the prepping amazing because the supplies are worth making and you can make them quickly, which I absolutely love. And the dungeon, just the environment of it, just feels so incredible. Like if you're looking at the Gauntlet, which is very square, it's the complete opposite. This is like a very rugged looking area. It looks like an actual cave. It has creatures inside of it. It has butterflies flying inside of it. Like it's a really awesome area compared to something like the Gauntlet. So Moon's Apparel, huge piece of content we need to shout out. The prayer training, it's at the top of the mountain just above Moon's Apparel, so I guess it keeps it relatively dense, and it's a good piece of content. Part 2 is unanimously like a step or two below the other two parts. It's the weakest part of Varlamore by far, and it's partially related to the content there not being like super exciting. But putting that aside, if we're just thinking again about content density and environment, there are areas where this was lacking. So Huey Kodal, I won't talk about the boss fight really. I made a whole video about that. There are things about the boss fight I did not like and I wish they would tweak, and it's clear they're not going to at this point. But beyond that, if we're thinking about environment here, I was expecting we would traverse up this mountain and take on this boss at the very summit, right? And it would be kind of epic to do that. This mountain is not really that mountain at all. It doesn't feel like you're traversing up this giant mountain. It's just taking out the tails, taking out the boss. I don't know, environmentally did not feel great. And I can't help but think that that giant mountain beside it was supposed to be the original home of this boss. It spirals up way more. It feels like an epic mountain. And then there's a peak summit at the top that feels high. I don't know, maybe they tried to do it and it didn't work out, but that would have been a better home for this type of fight to feel like you're actually traversing to reaching the summit. Yeah, environmentally would have really fit that niche very well. And okay, fine, we didn't put Huey Kodal there, sure, maybe it's there for another reason. I can't think of what that reason is. So now we're thinking about content density. We have this giant mountain that takes up a ton of space, no content whatsoever. So definitely points off for Varlamore Part 2 there. If we move a little bit more east, we have this little settlement here, which aesthetically looks pretty cool, definitely, but there's really nothing to do there. And then you have the emissary area, which again, looks pretty cool, definitely. And then content-wise, you do have the dungeon there that you can go in, take out some creatures. You can take out the boss too, a Moxiotl. So I would say, honestly, Part 2, surprisingly, even though the content's not like riveting content, this is kind of the best part of the map right here. Like, aesthetically looks pretty cool, and then you have this dungeon that has some things you can do within it and looks pretty cool as well. So it's weird that that's potentially the best part of Part 2, but it's a relatively low bar to set, definitely. There's also the Colossal Worm. This is Part 1 in terms of geographically, but Part 2 when it was released. It makes Part 1 feel better because the savannah feels a little bit more dense. But yeah, Colossal Worm is a pretty solid piece of content as well. And now we move all the way west to Alderaan. Alderaan introduced Mastering Mixology, so that's obviously the main reason why you go to Alderaan. Environmentally, Mastering Mixology looks pretty cool. The area around like Alderaan looks awesome as well. I like that it's like this wine country. It very much is unique. It feels alive. I love that. Beyond Mastering Mixology, you do have a quest that you do there as well. Quests are always nice for filling up an area. And then you have a few other shops and stuff like that for certain like low-level Ironmen that you might take advantage of. So Alderaan, I love environmentally. Content density-wise, I wish there was maybe a little bit more here. There's a couple hunter areas and stuff, but they're so random. I don't see those being super valuable. Now we're at Part 3 of Varlamore, the last part, and some people's favorite part for sure. We're going to start off with the rainforest area and talk about the content within it and the environment within it, because there's a lot going on here. The rainforest itself and the towns itself, when it comes to environment, I think are like really well done. There's a lot of creatures that feels alive. The towns feel unique. There's people on boats on the outside, which I think are, I don't know, it's so cool the way they paddle. So environmentally, this place is amazing. There's also a place to the south with the capybaras and stuff like that, which again, environmentally, really cool. Now, if we're thinking about content within this same area, Gemstone Crab, who does not love the Gemstone Crab? I am currently crabbing this very minute on my screen for an account that I'll tell you about a little bit later. So that's a great piece of content, and it moves around, so it makes kind of the areas feel a little bit more dense, I suppose, and you can mine there as well. There's some decent rocks there for early accounts. If we're looking at the Doom, that's obviously a piece of content technically in the rainforest or under the rainforest. There's also the Cavern, which has some content of some Nagwas you can take out as well, and some other creatures. One quest that you can do, the Scrambled quest. The quest was amazing. I love this quest. There is one part of the quest where you do go to a dragon's nest to get like a dragon egg, which is clearly for the quest. They added that area, but at least you can go back to that dragon's den and take out some blue and red dragons. So you added a little bit of content there. To the north of the rainforest, the only thing really notable here has got to be the red chinchompas. It's nice having another red chinchompa area, and it's a fairly large area as well. So content-wise, plus there. Towns, they don't have a ton of content within the towns. There's some like tree patches and stuff like that. There's an altar and rune shop, but you know, they're small towns, but there's not much to do. And then to the south, I mentioned the capybaras. Environmentally, I think is great. Content-wise, there's hardwood trees, but there's no reason why you would ever chop them there, really. Maybe, I guess, if you're dropping the logs, it's just a nicer spot to be. So I think overall, environmentally, this is like an A+. Content-wise, this is probably like pretty high as well, but slightly less because there's some areas I think that could use a little bit more density of content. Now, if we creep our way north, the first thing we're going to hit here is the Gloomthorn Trail. And I want to talk about this area for a minute. So environmentally, it's a cool area with dead trees and all that. The ambiance is pretty awesome, so definitely give it points for that. I like how it's in contrast to both the rainforest and Auburn Valley to the north. However, there is zero content here, like not even a little bit of content, like not even a hunter training or an interesting creature or an item spawn. Zilch. There's like one area in the middle I went to, this little house, and there's nothing inside other than an iron dagger. So this to me is a bit of a point where they could have done something a little bit more to really make Varlamore Part 3 feel dense all the way through. Maybe they will in the future, but for now, if you're ever walking through here, there's no reason to. Just take the rowboat up and down anyways. Moving north, though, we have the Auburn Valley. Environmentally, this is like S tier, man. The music is incredible. Everything is so serene. It looks incredible. There's creatures moving around. There's Ents moving around. There's beautiful like forestry and scenery. I love everything about this area aesthetically. The river going through the town, the different types of trees, the town itself, it like really fits the vibe of the area as well. Incredibly, amazingly done environmentally. Now, thinking about content density wise, I think it did a pretty good job as well. There are some hunter areas which are interesting. Nothing too crazy, but there is some common kibets at the top and some bird snares and stuff you can do. But beyond that, we have Veiled Totems. Veiled Totems is an incredible fletching activity, and it is not a mini game. I made a whole video on this. It is a really awesome piece of content that doesn't feel like a mini game because there's no rounds to it. It's part of the world. You can do it however you want. Speaking about however you want, if I was just saying the only thing in this area was Veiled Totems, it wouldn't feel super dense, but because of the way you can do Veiled Totems, it makes it feel more alive and more dense. You can instead decide that you want to do forestry worlds. This is an incredible area for forestry worlds because there's every type of tree. You can do the totems at the same time. You can get the moon keys, the half keys as well, while chopping the trees. Like everything about that makes it incredible. And forestry works so well here because just the environment works with it. And there's a freaky forester here. So they clearly had that planned out. So yeah, Auburn Valley, both environmentally and content density wise, is like complete S tier. Moving up north, you have Custodia Pass. Environmentally looks really awesome. I love passes, to be honest, in this game because they feel spooky and they're kind of like underground pass nostalgic. But beyond just that, content-wise, you have the Slayer Den. The Stalker Den here is obviously decent content, good Slayer monsters at mid-level. It has the offhand as well. You can make Addle Darts as well when you combine the Stalker Den with the Auburn Valley Ent branches, so it ties in nicely there. So there is some content in the Custodia Pass. I do wish there was a little bit more on the actual path itself, though. There's really nothing here. There's some trees, some mining, a fishing area. None of the creatures are interesting, so maybe they could have done a little bit more there to fill out that area to make it have a little bit more content, but still, I think it's, you know, an okay area. You just might not visit it at all outside of the Stalker Den. Now that we've talked about all 3 parts, how did they do? This is definitely the best area expansion we've had in Old School RuneScape. Now, the bar is not high if we're just looking at Kourend, right, being the only large-scale space update we've had. But if we're thinking about even other areas they've added over time to existing areas, this is still definitely up near the top. But let's break down as a whole environmentally and content density wise. So environmentally, like, everything is pretty much incredible. Everything feels alive, unique. It fits the area, and there's like little Easter eggs everywhere. I love it. From the cities to the wild areas to the forest, pretty much everything is great. The only part environmentally that felt a little bit weak was the Huikodal Mountain. It didn't feel like it fit the fight at all. And the Proud Spire beside it, despite being pretty epic and large, is also bland. Ultimately, probably because there's no content there, but it's not a super inspired environment area as a whole. But if we're thinking about content density now, how did they do with that? I think they did a pretty good job, better than they've probably done in the past, definitely, with making an area feel pretty dense. There's a lot to do in every area. Now, I will say that it seems to be in pockets, and then there's other areas that have nothing. So if we're thinking about part 1 again, I mentioned that the savannah is quite large, definitely, but if we're thinking about even the Sunset Coast, or we're thinking about the aqueducts into the north, like, there's nothing really in either of those areas. In fact, there's also dungeons near the aqueducts and in the city near the north where there's nothing inside of them, really, which is quite a shame. I wish there were like little dungeons, like kind of like the Varrock sewer. Like, it'd be cool to have something like that. So those areas could definitely use some improvement in terms of content. For part 2, I mentioned that the Proud Spire Mountain there. Oh my gosh, what a complete waste of space, surrounded by a ship area in a town that also really has no content. So it's like this black hole of nothingness in this area that I wish they would actually do something with, other than, hey, I have to go to the top of this mountain for a clue step. Like, that's not quite at the content threshold that I'm looking for. And speaking of content threshold, like, it really isn't a high bar. It could be a dungeon with creatures or even like a boss, but it could be even just like an interesting training area or a new creature or a creature with an interesting drop table. Like, all that can be interesting ways of adding content to these areas. For part 3, it's really just the Gloomthorn Trail there that I think they could do something a little bit more in there, maybe in the Custodia Pass a little bit as well. Last thing related to content has to do with quests. Quests are a great way to add content to an area, but quests are ultimately temporary. So once you complete them, you lose that content. So there's a couple things to keep in mind when you're adding content to a new area to keep the area feeling dense. First thing is, if you're going to add an area for a quest that you never visit to again, that is small and tucked away. So in Scrambled, you have a temple. It's relatively large, but at least it's tucked away. In Aldrin, you have that mansion for the costume needle, tucked away as well. Ribbiting Tail, you have the pond that's relatively tucked away as well, and small. That's a great way to make it so you're not filling up a space and making it feel more empty once you've completed the quest. The other thing you can do is add content after those quests or during those quests. They could be dungeons you go in. With Ribbiting Tail, there's now a hardwood tree patch you can use. Little things like that that you can add after a quest to give it a reason to go back to that area. But that's everything I wanted to mention with Varlamore, and I think it's an amazing area expansion overall, to the point where I've created a Varlamore only account. I'm thinking about making videos on it, so if you're interested, let me know in the comments below. But I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think of Varlamore as an area? How do you think they've done after releasing all 3 parts?